Happy Tuesday.
Good morning, everyone. It's the 2nd of June, 2020, which I will note is my parents' anniversary.
Yay.
And we are in a lovely day in Tulsa and a difficult day in the world. And I think it's safe to say that many of us are grieving right now. As the events in this country, I think, are making a sound around the world.
Yeah.
We're all processing a horrific single event and how that represents many horrific events. So this last week we've been really praying.
Yeah.
And just spending our intimate time with Papa. And really needing to hear his voice. And Papa's been very faithful.
Yeah. And needing to hear each other's too. In a world of social media, we often judge or are judged by how quickly we comment on something. And already in these difficult days, there's dividing lines, and if you this, then this, and these unnatural progressions and a bunch of buckets. And I know for myself, I haven't wanted to make a comment where I know a conversation is needed. And I feel like so much of this is our invitation to conversation with each other, with people we've talked to daily and people we've never talked to before. And so, there's a real grappling, I think, going on, and there's a very big opportunity to say the right thing, the wrong thing, to say too much, to not say enough, and to be moved from being accountable to his heart and how he moves and how he moves us, and to be judged on a soundbite or lack of one. And for us, I know we've needed to talk a lot to our kids.
Yes.
In these days, and
they're grieving too.
Yeah, they are grieving too. Yeah.
And I think there's goodness right now, and we have some things to talk about there. But Papa has provided, and this is a season. We can just say, this beautiful man, George Floyd. I think what I can express from Papa's heart is that, maybe obvious to most people, but maybe not obvious to everyone, is that his death was not Papa's will and was not Papa's timing. It was not what Papa wanted. But the hope in it is knowing, and I know I hear Papa saying that he is using this to shine the light greatly and to open these dialogues, like you're saying, and that they're desperately needed.
Yeah.
And I want to say this so that there is a context, because it opens such a floodgate to be able to see what Papa is doing amidst this tragedy. Mm-hmm. So here's the tragedy. What is Papa doing? And just yesterday, time early in the morning under the tallit with Papa, and he said, I'm going to sow some seeds. And then the rest of the day and all day yesterday, overnight, and even this morning, he's just been talking about what those seeds were. And he said, this does actually, because it is such a global thing, mm-hmm. and it affects, and I think we're going to be very bold and just say it affects people of color very mm-hmm. specifically, that this is a time for the world to even repent, mm-hmm. Change our minds and return to God, and even have a rebirth of mindset. And the catalyst for that is one of the big things Papa was saying to me over the last 24 hours. And he said, if you go back to March of 2018, and in Cape Town, South Africa, Papa revealed this 500-year rollover that had to be undone. And Alfonso de Albuquerque turned a key in South Africa and stole something from an entire continent of people, and diverted the flow of identity and inheritance from Africa east, because that created the most profitable lines of goods and services sold, and that is the root. That's the story we know, and I don't know the story in the 500 years prior, and I'm sure that there is a story, and there was more that goes back thousands of years, but the part that Papa revealed to us was from the 1500s, 1521 even, mm-hmm. and on, and it's the last 500 years that the continent of Africa has been stolen from, and so there are irrevocable gifts and call that have produced a provision, but the true identity and inheritance of the people of color, which Papa kept saying, the descendants of Africa, those people that are residents today, those people that are Africans today, but also the descendants that are all over the world, and that what we saw change when that key turned and that drought ended was such a tangible picture of what was to come, that people of color have lived their entire lives for 500 years in a drought. And there has been lack, and there has been this global mindset, this atrocity of lesser. And lesser is not true. That's not what God says. That is a horrific byproduct of a theft. And that theft has been undone. It has been returned. And what the thief has stolen must be returned with sevenfold restitution. Mm-hmm. And so we knew, even then, we knew that the fruit of what God did, and we give God the glory, of what God did 2 years ago. We saw a drought end. We saw a newspaper headline, "Deadbeat Dads Are a Thing of the Past." Mm-hmm. We saw a magazine cover celebrating the building blocks of the next world superpower for the first time in recorded history, and of modern history, I should say, being an African nation of Nigeria. And another magazine headline that shows the recalibration happening in India, which needs to happen because the people of India have also suffered having something that wasn't their covenant. And what we've been looking for now is a sign of something happening for the world to be able to see the injustice that has been taking place. And you combine that with what Papa said 4 years ago in Terraforming Legacy, and he said, I am taking the grace off so that the fruit of choice would be seen. Mm-hmm. And by removing that grace, the light shines. Not only, we see light coming from the sun, and so it's vertical, kind of top to bottom, but that, as we know, creates shadows under the obstacles to the light. But what God is saying is that he is shining light from his people. And so it's going in all directions, and there's no shadows. There's no place for people to hide these things mm-hmm. that are happening, that are just real. And, so if we say hatred, if we say violence, if we say greed, if we say injustice, mm-hmm. which is so true, injustice, mm-hmm. These things cannot hide anymore. Mm-hmm. Can't. Because even across these 4 years, we have seen in steps how the light is shining so bright. And so the global mindset of how people of color have been seen, treated, abused, and again, not everybody acknowledges this, but we are here to acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. We're here to say, no, this is very real. Yeah. And even across all of our lives, we've seen this, but it's not to remain mm-hmm. a second longer. And Papa is moving right now in a rescue, and that rescue means all of us get to participate in this. And there is a covenant that goes back to Terraforming Song, and so I guess that would be 6 years ago in creation's blood, and there is a covenant that Papa has for bringing who he is to the world, and all people groups from all descent have a role in that. And we as a body are incomplete without each other. This is a picture of oneness and a picture of the body of Christ. And what a perfectly timed picture, because it's the time of the bride, and the bride who becomes one with her groom Jesus. And in oneness, we can't have it without each other. We can't. And so there's a covenant to fight for. And that is, seeing those blood cells, where the red blood cells have oxygen in them, and that's the breath of God. And when that is carried throughout the world, through the spiritual traffic patterns around the world, then people receive the Spirit of God, the breath of God. And that's what reveals identity, and that's what releases inheritance. But when that is released, then it's the black blood cells that return to God to get more breath, so that the world has the identity and the inheritance. And this hasn't been happening. And our planet has been void of identity and inheritance. And that is a global reality from what has happened in Africa, what has happened to the descendants of Africa and the people of color around the world to this day. And so what we have is 500 years of people. 500 years of people establishing this sin of judgment and this cycle and all the world systems, that are there: abuse of authority, abuse of power, harm from abuse of authority and abuse of power. And that harm produces fear that leads to anger that triggers hate that is the building block of violence, and violence that justifies the abuse of authority, because authority that's abused uses those things to justify the abuse, and it just continues in a cycle over and over and over again. And the world has built, through these sins, strongholds after strongholds all over the world, and everyone is suffering because of it. But the people of color have seen this in their lives, and I think we all get to pause and recognize that the life experience of people of color has been an injustice, and has been we can say from what we know that it comes from this theft. It comes from this stolen identity and stolen inheritance. But it's complex, and it's intricate, and it's around the world. But of course, the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony is how it gets unplugged. But how it gets out of the fabric of society is, I think, where we are now. Mm-hmm. Is where these dialogues are so desperately needed, where we need to listen, and we need to talk, mm-hmm. and we need to share our experiences, mm-hmm. and we need to surround people of color, and we need to love each other, and walk through this journey of dismantling this injustice and pursuing covenant together and pursuing redemption together. Because Papa already has all things in motion for redemption. Redemption is in motion right now, so that all things can work together for good. But we all have a role to play in that. We all, we're processing grief right now. We've had a global pandemic, and we've had social media and all of these things that have brought us to this place where the enemy planned division. But Papa is using that division as a cut of covenant and as a pierce. that opens us up? And will we choose the journey of walking together and seeing our society set free at the very base level, the fabric of our society, the root that is in the earth and in the ground of societies here in America and all over the world? And will we finally have a redeemed love for each other? And from that, we will see Papa. We will see his breath. We will see his spirit, his ruach, like never before. And I know you and I have talked, these last few days. There's just so much. Mm-hmm. The Spirit is saying so much right now. Could we possibly say it all? And I think maybe the rest that we get in this, the freedom from the burden, is just being able to choose a life journey of redemption and covenant, and like a grief dunk, mm-hmm. where we're not trying to grieve and get it over with, mm-hmm. or we're definitely not going to sweep grief under the rug. We can't stuff this grief, and we don't want to vent it. It's classic grief dunk. We don't want to stuff our emotions and harm ourselves. We don't want to vent and harm another person. We want to process our emotions with God and with each other. And I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah. I'm going to confess to being very raw, right now. And so appreciative of just conversations that have begun, like we said, with our kids, and people have been writing and just needed a place to share what they're feeling, and not seeking answers, which is great because, we don't have all of those. What we have is an invitation that's always been there to become one. And we can only do that if we're all allowed to give and receive to each other, to share and explore and ask questions and share experiences, even if they're not the same. And we will have our first, we're calling it the regather, but we'll have our first to gather tonight since the beginning of March. And one of the things that Papa has so spoken to us about is tending to his presence. And he's been speaking to us through Ecclesiastes 5, where it says to walk carefully towards his presence, to come with reverence. And in another verse or so down, it says to let our words be few. And I learned so much over these past weeks what he's meant by that, which doesn't mean to be silent, but to be gracious to each other, and let our words matter. Let the fact that we're speaking them to each other matter, and let our differences draw us to a greater understanding that he delights in all of us. He delights in all of us. And he created color. And he didn't do that to divide us. He did that to reveal his image in so many ways. And for there to be a mystery in that we would desire to discover why that meant something to him. That there would be different colors in the soil that we were created from, that there would be different colors of skin, because there's greater ways to discover him. We are the image of Christ. We are the image of God. We are the image of El Shaddai. And so I want to come into this so humbly, and just be able to share, what the impact is, and what really we are seeing him doing in these days, because this, I think we all know this can't be, we've had a pandemic that has been across the earth, and now we have what is being walked through with racism and hatred. It's global as well. And so I just have to know when things are being revealed globally, it's so revealing his heart for us to become one. And we talked about that with Shavuot, and I do just want to come so humbly, because I do feel very broken by all of this. And Jesus came into the fullness of who he was at a time when there was all this governmental pressure and all these buckets and all of these things you had to choose in order to be this or that. And everyone wanted him to overturn the government. And he always said, I'm here so you'll become the government. And he came humbly, and he came to reveal peace that would pass all understanding. And he came to remind us that when in those days of the beginning of our origin, when God said, it is very good, he was looking at all he created, and there was no division in that. This is all very good. And in that very good, that word is shalom that was used there. And that there's so much depth and width to the meaning of shalom, but in that context, it meant that the return has always been, there's always been this invitation to return to shalom, which is when the image of God is recognized in every person. When we discover him in each other, and what has been separated is made whole, which is what Shavuot is about. And so my deepest prayer in these days has been, I just have been thinking of all the people gathered at Pentecost and how they were together for a feast, the Feast of Weeks, is what brought them together. And they were so unsuspecting of what was about to happen. And they were surrendered to this celebration and to what their invitation was in that season, and to being present and to being purposed for that. And because they were surrendered, he was able to have to move among them, and his breath broke things open. His breath came before the fire. And so looking at the week of Shavuot, and that's the week of a man saying, I can't breathe. And we all know that he says every knee shall bow. And he means every knee will bow to tend to who he is and to who we are. And a knee is not meant to bend, to break another person. It's not the design. And I think that's why worship right now, our physical, tangible, tending to how we express him is so important, because it reveals what our bodies are designed to do. Our tongues confess, our knees bow, we fall before him, we stand in awe. We've talked many times about the words of worship. And so just thinking that after his breath broke, that call for repentance came, and Peter, he stood in full of the Spirit and he called for repentance. And here in the season of Shavuot, we're all receiving that call for many things. And, at Shavuot, a shofar was blown. We know it so well at Rosh Hashanah, but at Shavuot, a shofar was blown, and it was for awakening. It was that call to be awake with him all night, be experiencing him, be reading the Torah, be understanding, what a gift that is. And the invitation was to live awakened. When it's blown at Rosh Hashanah, it's for those who didn't wake up then, and so just thinking of any time the Lord would come and look and say, why have I come if there's no one awake to receive me? And that we are in a great awakening now. And when we recognize that, as hard as it is to see these things and have uncomfortable conversations, and conversations that we've never had, or maybe we've had over and over, it matters that we do that. We have a whole chapter, one of the books, I don't know where it is, but Tables, and it's all about all the times Jesus sat at a table with someone and learned of their experience. Gave them an opportunity to share that, and then moved. He moved in a way that was beyond. They knew that he cared about not just their eternity, but their current circumstance. And that's who we're called to be. We can't just be about salvation. We've got to be about, we can't just be content with, you've got salvation. We've got to come to understand each other's life experience and what we're walking through, and how, what those difficulties and disparities are that will make it hard for us to walk eternally as we're created to. And so, gosh, so many things. I've been very just in a state of devastation since the young man, Ahmad, since we learned about that, and it broke some things open in me that I do want to be able to share, because I can't imagine being hunted down like an animal. And I was so reminded of a short story that I read in high school. I think it was called The Most Dangerous Game, but it was about this man who had an island, and he invited people to come and hunt on it. But when they got there, it turned out they were the prey. They were being hunted. And so it was the story of this one man. And I can't imagine all that coursed through him in those moments of being hunted like that. And so I think for me, it's opened up a reckoning with hate, and how real that is, and how prevalent it is. And I don't know persecution because of the color of my skin, but I do know being hated because of what we believe. And I do understand living under a threat of violence. And this was one of those hard conversations we had with the girls, because I realized we haven't talked to them as much about hate as we have love. And one of the reasons is they have seen hate in its greatest form until now, I think, towards people they love from people who say they're love, from the church, from the body, from people who, are believers. They've seen that, and we had never talked to them about the fact that somebody had threatened your life, and I realized that I had a broken spot from that, because I think, going back to that story, I've always realized there was hate, and that people would do it in the name of many things. They would act upon that hate, and how, I guess in my heart, I just want this to reveal the fissures in our foundation, how to comprehend racism in a way that we can be part of that healing and that hope. We've got to understand how easily we come to hate ourselves, or to judgment, or to oppress, or those things, or to enslave each other in different ways. And that we are invited to live awakened now and not turn our eyes from any of it, and especially not in ourselves. So where do we have prejudices? Where do we have judgments? We spent last year doing a whole season of nothing between us for this very reason. Finding those places where, because this is different, I can't be near you, and to move past this being political. This cannot be politics. It just can't. Because if we only unite because we're of the same party or of the same mindset, that won't last. It will fall. It will fail, just as our flesh does. It's not everlasting. His government is. His kingdom is. And so we get to find all those places in each other and explore them together, raw and vulnerably, where our perspectives can change, and that we realize our greatest authority is the compassion we carry, is when we go beyond what we think, what we can get most emotionally stirred up about, to what he feels, and echo that. And I had an experience the first night of Shavuot. And so I've been on a journey, and I don't want to take time to go into that, but I've had a journey with my breath, basically, and being able to breathe well. And so last Tuesday I got an appliance. It sounds like I got a refrigerator put in my mouth, but I got an appliance put in my mouth, and I'm learning to kind of negotiate with it a bit. But since I got it, my breath at night has shifted so much. I'm sleeping fully for the first time in a very long time. But I woke up in the night, and I so had wanted to stay up all night and read the Torah and just do that. But I knew that it was actually most precious to him that I slept. But I did have about a 2.5 hour period that I was awake, and I became so aware in that moment that I could breathe. And I could breathe fully. or as fully as I had known, because there's still more to come, but as fully as I had known. And I was just in awe of breath, of being able to breathe, and here in this week that, this life has been taken and those words are being said. And then what you shared about that covenant of breath. And, but what I realized in it was he is increasing our capacity to breathe. That's part of Shavuot. That's part of Pentecost. When we're awakened and we live that way, our capacity changes. And one of the ways we're going to recognize this greater capacity of breath is in our conversations with each other. And to not be indifferent. I had a dream last week also, and I've talked to the people in the dream. Well, all but one, but just to make sure it was okay to share it. So in the dream, we're at our first gathering, after coming out of our Shabbat, and I'm trying to gather everyone for worship, and because the Lord has spoken about this, and it's so important. And as I did, there were just kind of eye rolls and just disdain almost. And so there were two people, and so I've already told them, this is not about them. This is a revelation about the covenant. And they were like, please share it. So Timbrel and Adi, who are one flesher, they crossed their arms and rolled their eyes. And so, first of all, in the natural, those two would be the last people that would do that ever. So that's when I really knew he was speaking about that covenant among us, not about them. And so timbrel is the instrument that's in it. It's our windpipe, basically. It is the instrument of worship placed within us that our breath goes through. And so it's like a pipe. It's a, like an internal flute or, that kind of, or whistle, that kind of thing. But it's what reminds us that we're instruments of praise. That we might not be able to play an instrument, but we are instruments. And we get to express that in worship. And then Adi is about how we dress him with our praise. It's a gem that actually fits in a timbrel or an ephod. It's about how we adorn him with our praise. And then I didn't talk to Kanos, so sorry, Kanos, but he was in the sound booth, and he just looked at me like, I know, and realizing his covenant means to gather. Mm-hmm. And just so that the word for us is just not to be indifferent to the instruments of praise that we are, and how precious it is to him that breath ascends and descends with the inhale and exhale, and that our capacity increases to be able to take in what each other says and give to each other something that's valuable. Because we aren't here to worship, we're here to be worship. We're here just like all of creation to so naturally respond to him in worship. So last night we had our first date since February, and it was the first restaurant we've been to in this time. Until then, I still haven't been to a store, but now I've been to a restaurant. And the restaurant we ate at was on Reconciliation Way. And that was so profound because that road has been renamed since we did a land mission there related to the race riots, which were 99 years ago Sunday. And I will never forget that land mission. And I don't recall everyone that was on the team, but I just know Harp and I were on the team, and we went, and this wasn't, I remember just us being so hungry to understand what that was like for the people. And kind of a moment like when we celebrate Passover, and we celebrate it as if we were the slaves that came out of Egypt, because it's our history. And so I just remember us having this desire to understand it to that place. And so this wasn't just like, oh, here we are, we came to, pray this thing. Like, it took us to our core. Like, we just only wanted to pray his heart, and we wanted to be forever changed by it. And I remember when we completed, we sealed those prayers, and this train, it had already come by once, and then it came going the other way, like everything had turned around. And then the whistle blew, and Papa was just so present with us. And so when that area got the new name, Reconciliation Way, and I took a picture last night of 9 East Reconciliation Way, and what Papa said, it was just so hopeful for me, because I felt a little despairing, with all that's happened. But he said that the choice to reconcile is before us. We're in the East, and that place of inheritance, it is our inheritance to reconcile all these things, and to find a way to come together in this. So something that's kind of been going on for me since we got back from Antarctica is Papa started talking to me about social justice and having me look at it in the Hebrew context. And he just, had kind of revealed to me that he was bringing a time that we would confront the disconnect we have between compassion and kindness and caring for each other. And even how we've allowed our institutions, when all of our focus is on fixing the government instead of being his government, that sometimes we allow our institutions to sin for us, and we're not responsible, we're not accountable, but we're his government. And so I think we all recognize that this nation we are in, and probably any nation listening, we cannot say that our nation has done nothing but good all of its days. But we're here to restore through our lives and through each other, that we can do good unto him all of our days from here. And we can stop guarding our perspectives in order to maintain our image. Because, when Jesus turned those tables over, that's getting talked about a lot right now, it was all about revealing his image. It was because those that were selling the offerings, and honestly, I don't know that he was that happy about those offerings just not being provided, because he came to give everything he had, and so that if you didn't have those crops or those, livestock or birds or whatever it was, and you had to go and barter for it and plunder for it or whatever, that was really his heart. But when he turned those tables over, and we've talked about this before, it was because those selling things were hoarding those coins, and there were temple coins that had the image of the temple on them, and the other coins had the image of Caesar, and they were hoarding those. And he was really saying, you're in my image, live like it, reveal it, and so we can't continue to guard our perspectives as all there is in order to maintain our image, because he came to restore our ability to bear his image fully. And so we would come to that shalom, we would be surrendered to the shalom of seeing him in every person, even when they can't see him in themselves, knowing there's something and praying that and loving in that way. And to speak truth that is motivated by love for people, not getting our voice heard, but not, taking up a cause, but being motivated by love for people. So, I have been looking at social justice in the context of how it was defined in the Torah. And this is going to be a nutshell version, and I'm sure more will come. But I just, in it, have become very aware that oftentimes our Christianity can be so much about what happens at death, where in the Jewish culture, it was so much about how will we live, and really getting to choose that, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to comfort those who grieve, to bring hope to those who despair, to bring light to darkness, to bring joy to sorrow. So there's 7 parts of this. And I'm just going to give the nutshell, and maybe some other time I'll bring in all the scriptures that go with it. But the very first part of social justice, these are all from the Torah, is called tzedakah. And you guys will get to give me grace in all my pronunciations today. I hope you have your cup of morning tea and it'll help you. So that comes from the same root word as Sedek, which is one of the planets. And that name means the king and his righteousness. It means to live like him. So that's the very first precept of this social justice, is to live like him and not just in the parts that make us comfortable. And so this part is very much about meeting people where they are. And then the second part is Hesed, and that comes into visiting the sick, comforting those who mourn, welcoming travelers, welcoming foreigners, preparing funerals and throwing weddings. This is all part of social justice, being there to be part of that. These are acts that are done with your body. It's done with that instrument of praise, those instruments of worship. And so it's about responding to the covenant, being loyal towards him by giving to others what we've been given. And then there's Tikkun Olam, which means mending the world or repairing the universe. It's all about the light that he dispersed throughout creation, or one of the terms that's used is the hidden sparks. So creation isn't complete until those sparks are released and reconciled, until it becomes whole. So this is the way we partner with humanity as humanity and bring the world to wholeness, where we address poverty and violence, racism, discrimination, prejudice. It's when we allow the need for repair to be revealed to us and we begin to participate in it together as one. Tikkun Olam. I think that's one of my favorites. It's when we begin to enter into that shalom and recognize him in each other. And then the fourth part is De Matsoro, which means enough for his lack. And so the idea of this is you can't meet someone's need without knowing it. So this is where we learn about each other's life experience, what our family situation was, what our cultural, identity has been. So we look at things another way instead of looking the other way. We start to see different perspectives, and that's what Jesus did when he sat at the table. How much do you give? Enough for his lack. It's about meeting the need, but not. It's allowing each of us to have a unique history. you know, and there are some needs that are common, but there are some that are unique to each person. And, you know, we live in a society that's governed by the comfortable, you know, and so we have to be careful in this not to compound suffering by assuming we know what the need is and then just rushing in to fix it. You know, instead we get to discover what the need really is and then be moved by the Lord. And if we're doing that as one, and so many are responding, this is the Kol Ma'asar, right, in so many ways. Okay, and then the fifth part, I don't even know if I could try to pronounce it. Veheskatabo. So it's when a brother becomes low, you shall strengthen him, is what that phrase means. You will hold on to him. You don't speak at arm's length. You take hands. Your hands are gripped in fellowship. We can't hold hands if we're pointing fingers. Any of us, we've got to stop pointing and start taking hold. So when we see someone's need, that's when we start to move equally. We start to move in equality because it becomes about our fellowship and fellowshipping together. And then the sixth part is Peah, and that's about the corner of the field, that we always leave a corner of our field of what we've been given unharvested. Something I learned about this, because we've talked about this many times, and right here at Shavuot and Ruth and all of that. But if your field is divided by a wide stream, it's treated as two fields. So Peah, it's P-E-A-H, it's the idea of multiplying what we have. And so there's no loopholes. This is about not taking privilege, not taking advantage because you can, not finding the way you can skirt around the rules and get more for yourself, but how you can multiply. And this is where we reveal if we trust him or not. You know, if we find the way to skirt past a cost or, you know, whatever it is, just because we can doesn't make it right. Another part of this is if your field is planted with more than one crop, it's considered two fields. So if you had wheat and barley, that's two fields. So you would leave all those corners. So it's not 4 corners, it's 8 corners. Or if you had 4 things, it's 16 corners. But it's all about, it's reminding us we're here to multiply. And that, so one of the things that included, this was like Boaz saying to Ruth, come into the field, not just the corners, because he had multiple crops. And so she needed to go all the way through his field. So it wasn't this marginalized place of charity. It was this fullness of generosity. And then the last one is, oh boy, Kai Garim Hayatem Peretz Mitzrayim. And so it means do not oppress the stranger, because you were strangers too. And it's going back to the fullness of our history. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. That we know better than to perpetuate injustice through our actions or our inaction. And without his assistance, without it being his heart, it will not have impact. And I think so much of this one is just coming to that place where we begin to meet needs instead of fixing problems. There's a big difference in that. And yeah, there it is. Social justice in Hebrew. And I don't know, just in looking at it, it feels very real, very tangible, very hopeful in becoming one.
It is, and you know, it's all about coming together, and you know, the chapter that you referenced, tables, you know, just reminds me of course, our neighbor's table, which I know was part of the inspiration, and we got to sit at that several times over the last few weeks, and it's just such a reminder, because that table has 4 corners in it, and so we get to have ushpazins, but there's just a call for us to come together and heal.
Yeah.
This is a season of healing, and Papa has made it clear. I mean, it's painful just to say the words, but when George Floyd said, "I can't breathe," that was an instance of injustice, and now today we can see it and say, what a picture that is of how people of color have been denied breath. And then we have COVID-19, which is a respiratory virus that has stolen breath from hundreds of thousands of people across the world right now. And like you said, in Africa, it was the breath of God that was cut off, that was stolen, that very highway of identity and inheritance.
Yeah.
And I know some people listening probably want to know, so it's terraforming communion.
Okay.
Is where
that makes sense.
Yeah. Communion is where tables is, and communion is where traffic is. So traffic with Albuquerque and tables for our gathering.
Yeah. And that when I was reading through those, just the context of social justice in Hebrew, and the one about just as I was coming into that, and not letting our institutions do the sinning for us. And I think right now is a great time, as we are going to pray for change and for impact to our government, but that's not going to be our salvation. Jesus is.
Yes.
And only He is. And He's going to move us to respond. But in that, we need to look at the permissions we've received to behave badly, to be part of discrimination, to be part of racism, to be, and to allow it to be so pervasive it affects every relationship that we have. I'm so reminded of Madeleine L'Engle and A Wrinkle in Time. I don't remember if it's in that book or one of the subsequent ones, but where there's this moment where Meg has to name someone that has been unkind to her and has actually harmed her. And I would say in these last years, one of the things that has caused the greatest ache for me is there has been, and I'm sure it's not the greatest in history because we've had so many times, with the people of color, the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, Asian people, every race has experienced, discrimination and hatred and oppression in some way. The people who have such revelation of who He is. But let us not agree with the unnaming, because I have seen in these years unnaming. And how does that happen? By calling. I mean, it's like kids on a playground and just calling names. And because you feel this, you're this, and terrible names. Our breath is better than that.
Yes.
His breath will only break upon the unsuspecting. There's a lot of gatherings happening right now. What if His breath came upon the unsuspecting because of what we said, because we named? We can't allow this permissiveness to be here because it's governmentally approved, or it's the way it is. We are His government, and we're namers. We're multipliers. We're nurturers. We're tenders. We're completers, which is much greater than fixing a problem. It's changing things forever. So as we're allowing ourselves to be changed, through all of this. I know we're all grappling with that. Let's make sure we're naming each other.
Amen. Well, let's pray.
Yeah.
Before we...
For sure.
Papa, here we are. And your sons and daughters join the world in this time of grief. And there are so many emotions, Papa, because as you know, this is a something that to us is very large and very intricate. And we have many emotions that we feel. Many people are feeling fear right now. Many people are feeling anger right now. Many people are grieving right now. And we don't want to stuff these emotions again. We don't want to hurt ourselves by burying something that is just a cancer. And Papa, we don't want to vent our emotions at someone or at something. We want to process those emotions with you so that we can process them with each other. And it would be an expression of love. And Papa, we thank you for this awakening, that we all in the world can see each other. We can see this this painful door, but this glorious redemption of one nightmare that is a drop in an ocean of nightmares that have taken place, but that we can see redemption by surrounding people of color around the world and loving each other into the truth of what you say, the identity and the inheritance that are truth, that are the highways of who you are, that surround creation, surround the earth, and that we have access to these things, and that we may not have had access before, but we do now. And Papa, that it would lead us to a place of breath where we inhale from you, and that we become stewards of our exhale, that we lay down the idle words or the words that aren't truly what we mean, but we would become better people because of it. And that, Papa, that we would be able to share breath, just like the people of Hawaii taught the world, that sharing breath, that intimacy is when we truly get to know each other. And so that we can inhale each other's breath and exhale to provide each other breath. And Papa, we know there are many strongholds of injustice to be dismantled, and we thank you that is a place of rest, and that you will reveal them, that each of us will get to participate in that way. But we choose today to be stewards of the kingdom of love, and a people who will gather together and make room for you to move in our midst, and make room for each other to be able to express what's in our hearts in this season.
And Papa, your goodness prevails when we're brave enough to believe it and reveal it. And so we want to be motivated by love. We want to find, not fix. We want to restore. And Papa, we return. We repent. We return from the life of hunting each other down instead of finding each other and meeting each other's needs, and for breaking each other with things meant for worship. where we worshiped ourselves instead of you and protected our perspectives instead of pursuing your passion for all to be seen and known and loved and held by you. And even in the case of Brianna, the sweet, beautiful woman who her life was taken because of a mistaken address or identity. And Papa, so every way we have not seen who each other truly is and barged in and assaulted each other and taken from each other instead of giving to each other. We just come humbly to learn and to grow and to mature and to just spend our inheritance wisely. We get to be in the East where all you have is ours to give. And we are so grateful for that. Help us heal. Help us heal each other. Help us meet each other in every place that needs to be met, so that your prayer, sweet Jesus, that we would be one, could be answered swiftly and sweetly. In your amazing name, we ask. Amen.